Chapter 27. Why the last cookie in the jar makes your mouth water. Scarcity error. Coffee at a friend's house. We sat trying to make conversation while her three children grapple with one another on the floor. And suddenly I remember that I had brought some glass marbles with me, a whole bag full. I spilled them out on the floor in the hope that the little angels would play with them in peace. Far from it, a heated argument ensued. I didn't understand what was happening until I looked more closely. Among the countless marbles there was just one blue one, and the children scrambled for it. All the marbles were exactly the same size and shiny and bright, but the blue one had an advantage over the others. It was one of a kind. I had to laugh at how childish children are. In August 2005, when I heard that Google would launch its own email service, I was dead set on getting an account. In the end, I did. At the time, new accounts were very restricted and were given out only on invitation, and this made me want one even more. But why? Certainly not because I needed another email account, nor because Gmail was better than the competition, but simply because not everyone had access to it. Looking back, I have to laugh at how childish adults are. Rara Sankara, said the Romans. Rare is valuable. In fact, the scarcity error is as old as mankind. My friend, with three children, is a part-time real estate agent. Whenever she has an interested buyer who cannot decide, she calls and says, "A doctor from London saw the plot of the land yesterday. He liked it a lot. What about you? Are you still interested?" The doctor from London, sometimes it's a professor or a banker, is of course fictitious. The effect is very real, though. It causes prospects to see the opportunity disappearing before their eyes, so they act and close the deal. Why? This is the potential shortage of supply. Yet again, objectively, this situation is incomprehensible. Either the prospect wants the land for the set price or he does not, regardless of any doctors from London. To assess the quality of cookies, Professor Stephen Fortchell split participants into two groups. The first group received an entire box of cookies, and the second group just two. In the end, the subject with just two cookies rated the quality much higher than the first group did. The experiment was repeated several times and always showed the same result. Only while stocks, alas, the adverts alert. They only warn the posters. Gallery owner take advantage of the scarcity error by placing red salt dots under most of the painting and transforming the remaining few work into rare items that must be snatched up quickly. We collect stamps, coins, vintage cars, even when they serve no practical purpose. The post office does not accept the old stamp, the bank don't take old coin, and the vintage cars are long allowed on the road. And these are all side issues. The attraction is that they are in short supply. In one study, students were asked to arrange 10 posters in order to attractiveness, with the agreement that afterward they could keep one poster as a reward for their participation, and 5 minutes later they were told that the poster with the third highest rating was no longer available. Then they were asked to judge all 10 from scratch. The poster that was no longer available was suddenly classified as the most beautiful. In psychology, this phenomenon is called reactance. When we are deprived of an action, we suddenly deem it more attractive, and when we are deprived of an option, we suddenly deem it more attractive. It is a kind of act of defiance. It is also known as the Romeo and Juliet effect because the love between the tragic Shakespearean teenagers is forbidden. It knows no bounds, and this yearning does not necessarily have to be a romantic one. In the US, student parties are often littered with desperately drunk teenagers just because it's illegal to drink below the age of 21. In conclusion, the typical response to scarcity is a lapse of clear thinking. A SaaS product and services solely on the basis of their price and benefit, it should be of no importance if an item is disappearing fast, nor if any doctors from London take an interest. Chapter 28. When you hear hoofbeats, don't expect a zebra. Base rate neglect. Mark is a teen man from Germany with glasses who likes to listen to Mozart, which is more likely that Mark is A truck driver, or B, a professor of literature in Frankfurt. Most will be bet on B, which is wrong. Germany has 10,000 times more truck drivers than Frankfurt has literature professor, and therefore it is more likely that Mark is a truck driver. So what just happened? The detailed description entices us to overlook the statistical reality. Scientists call this fallacy base rate neglect, a disregard of fundamental distribution levels. It is one of the most common errors in reasoning. Virtually all journalists, economists, and politicians fall for it on a regular basis. Here is a second example. A young man is stabbed and fatally injured, which of this is more likely? A. The attacker is a Russian immigrant and imports combat knives illegally. Or B. The attacker is a middle-class American, you know, the drill now. The option B is much more likely because there are a million times more middle-class American than there are Russian knife importers. In medicine, base rate neglect plays an important role. For example, migrants can point to a viral infection or a brain tumor. However, viral infections are much more like common. So doctor assess patient for this first before testing for tumors. This is a very reasonable. In medical school, residents spend a lot of time purging base rate neglect, and the motto drummed into any prospective doctor in the United States is, when you hear half beats behind you, don't expect to see a zebra, which means investigate the most likely ailment before you start diagnosing exotic disease, even if you are a specialist in that. And doctors are the only professional who enjoy this base rate training. Regrettably, few people in the business are exposed to it. And now and then I see high-flying entrepreneurs business plan and get very excited and buy the product ideas and personalities, and I often catch myself thinking, this could be the next Google, but I glance at the base rate brings me back and down to earth, and the probability that the firm will survive the first 5 years is 20%. So what then is the probability that they will grow into a global corporation? Almost zero. Warren Buffett once explained why he does not invest in biotech companies. How many of these companies make a turnover of several $100 million? It simply does not happen. The most likely scenario is that these firms will just hover somewhere in the middle, and this is clear best rate thinking. For most people, survivorship bias, chapter 1, is one of the causes for their best rate neglect. They tend to see only the successful individual and companies because the unsuccessful cases are not reported or are underreported, and this makes them neglect a large part of the invisible cases. Imagine you are sampling wine in a restaurant and have to guess from which country it comes. The label of the bottle is covered. If, like me, you are not a wine connoisseur, the only lifeline you have is the base rate, and you know from the experience that about 3/4 of the wines of the menu are French origin, and so reasonably you guess French, even if you suspect a Chilean or a Californian twist. Sometimes I have a dubious honor of speaking in front of the student of elite business school. When I ask them about their career prospect, most answer that in the medium term, they see themselves on the boards of global companies. And years ago, about my fellow student, and I gave the same answer. The way I see it, my role is to give students the base rate crash course with a degree from the school. The change of you landing a spot on the board of a Fortune 500 company is less than 0.1%, and no matter how smart and ambitious you are, the most likely scenario is that you will end up in the middle management. With this, I earn shock looks and tell myself that I have made a small contribution toward mitigating their future midlife crisis. Chapter 29. Why the balancing force of the universe is baloney? Gambler's fallacy. In the summer of 1930, something incredible happened in Monte Carlo. Crowds gathered around the roulette table and could not believe their eyes. The ball had landed on black 20 times in a row, and many players took advantage of the opportunity and immediately put their money on red. But the ball continued to come to the rest on black, and even more people flocked to the table to bet on red. It had to change eventually. But it was a black cat again, and again, and again. It was not until the 27th spin that the ball eventually landed on red. By that time, the players had bet millions on the table in a few spins of the wheel, and they were bankrupt. The average IQ of pupils in a big city is 100. To investigate these, you take a random sample of 50 students and the first child tested has an IQ of 150. What will the average IQ of your 50 students be? The most people guess 100, and somehow they think that the super smart student will be balanced out perhaps by this small student with an IQ of 50 or by two below average student with an IQ of 75. But with a so small sample, that is very unlikely. We must expect that the remaining 49 students will represent the average of the population, so they will each have an average IQ of 100. 49 times 100 plus 1 IQ of 150 gives us an average of 101 in the sample. The Monte Carlo example and the IQ experiments show that people believe in the balancing force of the universe. This is the gambler fallacy. However, with independent event, there is no harmonizing force at work. A ball cannot remember how many times it has landed on black, and despite this, one of my friends entered the weekly Mega Million number into a spreadsheet, and then placed those that have appeared at the least. All this work is for naught. He is another victim of the gambler's fallacy. The following joke illustrates this phenomenon. A mathematician is afraid of flying due to the small risk of the terrorist attack. So, even on every flight, he takes a bomb with him in his hand luggage. The probability of having a bomb on the plane is very low, he reasons, and the probability of having not two bombs on the same plane is virtually zero. A coin is flipped 3 times and lands on heads on each occasion. Suppose someone forces you to spend thousands of dollars of your own money betting on the next toss. Would you bet on heads or tails? If you think like most people, you will choose tails. Although heads is just likely, the gambler fallacy leads us to believe that something must change. A coin is tossed 50 times. Each time it lands on heads, again with someone forcing you to bet. Do you pick heads or tails? And now that you have seen an example or two, you are wise to the game. You know that it could go either way, but we have just come across another pitfall. The classic deformation, professional oversight of mathematicians. Common sense would tell you that the heads is the wiser choice since the coin is obviously loaded. Previously, we look at regression to mean. An example, if you are experiencing a record cold where you live, it is likely that the temperature will return to normal value over the next few days. If the weather functioned like a casino, there would be a 50% change that the temperature will rise and 50% change that it will drop. But the weather is not like a casino, complex feedback mechanism in the atmosphere, and so that extreme balance themselves out. In other cases, however, extreme intensify. For example, the rich tend to get richer, a stock that shut up creates its own demand to a certain extent, and simply because it stands out so much, a sort of reverse compensation effect. So, take a closer look at the independent and interdependent event around you. Purely independent event really only exists at the casino, in the lottery, and in theory. In real life, in the financial market and the business, with the weather and your health, events are often interrelated. What has already happened has an influence on what will happen, as comforting an idea as it is, and there is simply no balancing force out there for independent event. What goes around, comes around, simply does not exist. Chapter 30. Why the Wheel of Fortune makes our heads spin. The encore. When was Abraham Lincoln born? If you don't know the year off the top of your head, and your smartphone battery has just died, how do you answer this? Perhaps you know that he was president during the Civil War in the 1860s and that he was the first US president to be assassinated. Looking at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, you don't see a young, energetic man, but something more akin to a worn-out 60-year-old veteran. The memorial must depict him at the age of his political power, say at the age of 60. Let's assume that he was assassinated in the mid-1860s and making 1805 our estimate for the year he was born. The correct answer is 1809. So how did we work it out? We found an encore to help us the 1860s and work from there to an education. Whenever we have to guess something, the length of the Mississippi River, population density in Russia, the number of nuclear power plants in France, we use encores. We start with something we are sure of and venture into unfamiliar territory from there. And how else could we do it? Just pick a number off the top of our heads, and that would be irrational. Unfortunately, we also use encore when we don't need to. For example, one day, in a lecture, a professor placed a bottle of wine on the table. He asked his students to write down the last two digits of their social security numbers and then decide if they would be willing to spend that on the wine. In the auction that followed, students with higher numbers bid nearly twice as much as the student with the lower numbers. The social security digit worked as an encore, albeit in a hidden and misleading way. The psychologist Arnos Tversky conducted an experiment involving a wheel of fortune. He had participants spin it, and afterward they were asked how many numbers the United States nations has, and their guesses confirmed the encore effect. The highest estimate came from people who had spun high numbers on the wheel. Researchers Russo and Shoemaker asked students in what year Attila the Hun suffered his crushing defeat in Europe. Just like the example with social security numbers, the participants were encore, and this time with the last few digits of their telephone number, the result. People with higher numbers choose later years and vice versa. Another experiment, student and professional real estate agent were given a tour of a house and asked to estimate its value. Beforehand, they were informed about a randomly generated listed sales price. As might be expected, the encore influenced the student. The higher this price, the higher they value the property. And the professionals, did they value the house objectively? No. They were similarly influenced by the random encore amount, and the more uncertain the value of something such as real estate, company stock, or art, the more susceptible events experts are to encore. Encores abound, and we all clutch at them. The recommended retail price printed on many products is nothing more than an encore, and sales professionals know they must establish a price at an early stage, long before they have an offer. Also, it has been proven that if teachers know student past grades, it influences how they will mark new work, and the most recent grades act as a starting point. In my early years, I had a quick stint at the consulting firm. My boss was a pro when it came to using encores. In his first conversation with any client, he made sure to fix an opening price, which, by the way, almost criminally exceeded our internal costs. I will tell you this. Now you are not surprised when you receive the quote, Mr. So-and-so. We have just completed a similar project for one of your competitors, and it was in the range of $5 million. The encore was dropped. The price negotiation started at exactly $5 million. Chapter 31: How to Relieve People Under Millions. Induction. A farmer feeds a goose. At first, the shy animal is hesitant, wondering what's going on here. Why is he feeding me? And this continues for a few more weeks until eventually the goose's skepticism gives away. After a few months, the goose is sure that the farmer has my best interest at heart, and each additional day's feeding confirms this. Fully convinced of the man's benevolence, the ghost is a mess when he takes it out of its enclosure on Christmas Day and slaughters it. The Christmas ghost fell victim to inductive thinking, the inclination to draw universal certainties from individual observation. Philosopher David Hume used this allegory back in the 18th century to warn of its pitfall. However, it's not just kids that are susceptible to it. An investor buys shares in StockX, and the share price rocket, and at first he is well worried, probably a bubble, he suspects. As the stock continues to rise, even after a month, his apprehension turns into excitement, and this stock may never come down, especially since every day this is the case. After half a year, he invests his life saving in it and turning a blind eye to the huge collateral risk this possesses. Later, the man will pay for his foolish investment. He has fallen hook, line, and sinker for induction. Inductive thinking does not have to be a read-to-win stuff. In fact, you can make a fortune with it by sending a few emails. Here is how. Put together two stock market forecasts, one predicting the price will rise next month and one warning of a drop. And send the first email to 50,000 people and the second email to a different set of 50,000. And suppose that after 1 month the indices have fallen. I know you can send another email, but this time only to the 50,000 people who receive a correct prediction. This 50,000 you divide into two groups. The first half learns that prices will increase next month, and the second half discover they will fall. Continue doing this. After 10 months, around 100 people will remain, all of whom you have advised impeccably. And from their perspective, you are a genius. You have proven that you are truly in a position of prophetic powers. Some of these people will trust you with their money and take it and start a new life in Brazil. However, it's not just a naive stranger who get deceived in this way. We constantly trick ourselves too. For example, people who are really ill consider themselves immortal. CEOs who announce increased profits in consecutive quarters deem themselves infallible, and their employees and shareholders do too. I once had a friend who was a base jumper. He jumped off cliffs, antennae, and building and pulling the ripcord only at the last minute, and one day broke up how risky his chosen sport is. He replied quite matter-of-factly, I have over 1,000 jumps under my belt, and nothing has ever happened to me. And 2 months later he was dead. It happened when he jumped from a particularly dangerous cliff in the South Africa, and a single event was enough to eradicate a theory confirmed 1,000 times over. Inductive thinking can have devastating results, yet we cannot do without it, and we trust that when we board a plane, aerodynamic law will still be valid. We imagine that we will not be randomly beaten up on the street. We expect that our hearts will still be beating tomorrow, and these are confidence without which we could not live. But we must remember that certainties are always provisional. As Benjamin Franklin said, nothing is certain but death and taxes. Induction seduces us and leads us to conclusions such as mankind has always survived, so we will be able to tackle any future challenges too. Sounds good in theory, but what we fail to realize is that such a statement can only come from a species that has lasted until now. To assume that our existence to date is an indication of our future survival is a serious flaw in reasoning, probably the most serious of all. Chapter 32. Why Evil Strikes Harder Than Good. Loss Aversion. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you feel today? And now consider what would bring up you to a perfect 10. That vacation in the Caribbean you have always dreamed of? A step up the career later maybe? And next question, what would make you drop down by the same number of points? Paralysis, Alzheimer's, cancer, depression, war, hunger, torture, financial ruin, damage to your reputation, losing your best friend, your children getting kidnapped, blindness, death. The long list of possibilities make us realize just how many obstacles to happiness exist. In short, there are more bad things than good, and they are far more consequential. In our evolutionary past, this was even more the case. The one stupid makes mistake, and you are dead. Everything could lead to your rapid departure from the game of life, and carelessness on the hand, and inflamed tendon, exclusion from the group, and so on. And people who were reckless or gung-ho died before they could pass their genes on to the next generation, and those who remain the cautious survive. We are their descendants. So no wonder we fear loss more than we value gain. Losing $100 costs you a greater amount of happiness than delight you would feel if I give you $100. In fact, it has been proven that emotionally a loss weighs about twice that of a similar gain. Social scientists call this loss aversion. For this reason, if you want to convince someone about something, don't focus on the advantages. Instead, highlight how it helped them dodge the disadvantages. Here is an example from a campaign promoting breast self-examination, BSE. The different leaflets were handed out to women. A pamphlet A urged research showed that women who do PSA have an increased chance of finding a tumor in the early, more treatable state of disease. And pamphlet B said research showed that women who do not do BSE have a decreased chance of finding a tumor in the early, more treatable state of the disease. The study revealed that pamphlet B, written in a lost frame, generated significantly more awareness and BSE behavior than pamphlet A. The fear of losing something motivates people more than the prospect of gaining something of equal value. Suppose your business is home insulation, and the most effective way to encourage a customer to purchase your product is to tell them how much money they are losing without insulation, as opposed to how much money they would save with it, even though the amount exactly is the same. This type of aversion is also found on the stock market, where investors tend to simply ignore losses on paper, and after all, an unrealized loss is not as painful as the realized one, so they sit on the stock even if the chance of recovery is small and the probability of further decline is large. I once met a man, a multimillionaire, who was terribly upset because he had lost a $100 billion. What a waste of emotion. I pointed out that the value of his portfolio fluctuated by at least $100 every second, and management gurus push employees in large companies to be bolder and more entrepreneurial. The reality is, employees tend to be risk-averse, and from their perspective, this aversion makes perfect sense. Why risk something that brings them, at best, a nice bonus, at worst, a paying slip? The downside is larger than the upside. In almost all companies and situations, safeguarding your career trumps any potential reward. So if you have been scratching your head about the lack of risk taken among your employee, you know now why. However, if employees do take a big risk, it is often when they can hide behind group decisions. Learn more in chapter 33 on social loafing. We can't fight it. Evil is more powerful and more plentiful than good. We are more sensitive to negative than to positive things. On the streets, scary face stands out more than smiling ones. We remember bad behavior longer than good, except, of course, when it comes to ourselves. Chapter 33: Why Teams Are Lazy. Social Loafing. In 1913, Maximilien Ringelmann, a French engineer, studied the performance of horses. He concluded that the power of two animals pulling a coach did not equal twice the power of a single horse. Surprised by this result, he extended his research to humans. He had several men pull a rope and measure the force applied by each individual. On average, if two people were pulling together, each invested just 93% of their individual strength. When three pulled together, it was 85%, and with 8 people, just 49%. Science calls this the social loafing effect. It occurs when individual performance is not directly visible. It blends into the group effort. It occurs among rowers, but not in relay races, because here individual contributions are evident. Social loafing is a rational behavior. Why invest all your energy when half will do? Especially when this little shortcut goes unnoticed. Quite simply, social loafing is a form of cheating of which we are all guilty, even if it takes place unconsciously, just as it did with the Ringelmann's horses. When people work together, individual performance decreases. This is not surprising. What is not worthy, however, is that our input does not green to a complete halt. So what stops us from putting our feet up completely and letting the others do all the hard work? The consequences. Zero performance would be noticed, and it brings with it weight. The punishment, such as exclusion from the group and or vilification. Evolution has led us to develop many fine-tuned sense, including how much idleness we can get away with and how to recognize it in others. Social loafing does not occur solely in a physical performance, with lack of mentality too. For example, in meetings, the larger the team, the weaker our individual participation. However, once a certain number of participants is involved, our performance plateaus. And whether the group consists of 20 or 100 people is not important. Maximum inertia has been achieved. One question remains: who came up with the much funded idea that teams achieve more than individual workers? Maybe the Japanese. 30 years ago, they flooded the global market with their product. Business economists looked more closely at the industrial miracle and saw the Japanese factory were organized into teams. This model was copied with mixed success. What worked very well in Japan could not be replicated with the American and Europeans. Perhaps because social living rarely happens there. In the West, teams function better if and only if they are small and consist of diverse, specialized people. And this makes sense because within such a group, individual performance can be traced back to each specialist. Social living has interested implication in group. We tend to hold back not only in terms of participation but also in terms of accountability. Nobody wants to take the rap for the misdeed or poor decision of the whole group. A glaring example is the prosecution of the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, or less controversially, any board of management team. We hide behind the decision. The technical term for this is diffusion of responsibility. For the same reason, teams tend to take a bigger risk that their members will take on their own. The individual group members reason that they are not the only ones who will be blamed if things go wrong. This effect is called risk-safe and is especially hazardous among company and pension fund strategies, where billions are at stake. Or in defense department, where groups decide on the use of nuclear weapons. In conclusion, people behave differently in groups than when alone, and otherwise there will be no groups. The disadvantages of groups can be mitigated by making individual performances as visible as possible, and long life meritocracy. Long life the performance society. See also motivation crowding, social proof, groupthink, and loss aversion. Chapter 34. Stamped by a sheet of paper. Exponential growth. A piece of paper is folded in two, then in half again and again. How thick will it be after 50 folds? Write down your guess before I continue reading. Second task. Choose between those options. A. Over the next 30 days I will give you $1,000 a day. Or B. Over the next 30 days I will give you $1 on the first day and $0.02 on the second day, $0.04 on the third day, and $0.08 on the fourth day, and so on. Don't think too long about it. A or B? Are you ready? Well, if we assume that a sheet of copy paper is approximately 0.0004 inches thick, then its thickness after 50 holds is a little over 60 million miles, and this equals the distance between the Earth and the Sun, as you can check easily with a calculator. With the second question, it is worthwhile choosing option B, even though A sounds more tempting. Selecting A earns you only $30,000 in 30 days. Choosing B gives you more than 5 millions. Linear growth we understand intuitively. However, we have no sense of exponential or a percentage growth. Why is this? Because we didn't need it before. Our center's experiences were mostly of a linear variety. However, spent twice the time collecting barriers earned double the amount. Whoever hunted the mammoth instead of one could eat for twice as long. In the Stone Age, people rarely come across exponential growth, and today, things are different. Each year, the number of traffic accidents rises by 7%, warns a politician. Let's be honest, we don't intuitively understand what this means, so let's test the trick and calculate the doubling time. Start with the magic number of 70 and divide it by the growth rate in percent. In the instance, 70 divided by 7 equal to 10 years. So what the politician is saying is, the number of traffic accidents doubles every 10 years, pretty alarming, and you may ask, why the number of 70? This has to do with a mathematical concept called logarithm. You can look it up in the notes section. Another example, inflation is at 5%. Whoever hears these things, that's not so bad, but what's 5% anyway? Let's quickly calculate the doubling time. 70 divided by 5 equal to 14 years. In 14 years, a dollar will be worth only half what it is today. A catastrophe for anyone who has a saving account. Suppose you are a journalist and learn that the number of registered dogs in your city is rising by 10% a year. Which headline do you put on your article? Certainly not. Dog registration increased by 10%. No one will care. Instead, announce deluge of dogs, twice as many moths in 7 years' time. Nothing that grows exponentially grows forever, and most politicians, economists, and journalists forget that. Such a growth will eventually reach a limit warranted. For example, the intestinal bacterium and Escherichia coli divides every 20 minutes. In just a few days, it could cover the whole planet, but since it consumes more oxygen and sugar than is available, its growth has a cutoff point. The ancient Persians were well aware that people struggle with percentage growth, and here is a local tale. There was once a wise courtier who presented the king with a chessboard. Moved by the gift, the king said to him, "Tell me how I can thank you." The courtier replied, "Your Highness, I want nothing more than for you to cover the chessboard with rice, putting 1 grain of rice on the first square and then on every subsequent square, and twice the previous number of grains." And the king was astonished. "It is an honor to you, dear courtier, that you present such a modest request. But how much rice is that?" The king guessed about the stock. All even his servant began the task, placing a grain on the first square, 2 grains of rice on the second square, and 4 grains of rice on the third, and so on. Did he realize that he would need more rice than was growing on earth? When it comes to growth rates, don't trust your intuition. You don't have any. Accept it. What really helps is a calculator, or with the low growth rates, the magic number of 70. See also simple logic, neglect of probability, and the law of speed. Chapter 35. Curb Your Enthusiasm. Winner's Curse. Texas in the 1950s, a piece of land is being auctioned. 10 oil companies are vying for it, and each has made an estimate of how much the site is worth. The lowest assessment is $10 million and the highest is $100 million. The higher the price climbs during the auction, the more firms exceed the bidding. And finally, one company submits the highest bid and wins. Champagne corks pop. The winner's curse suggests that the winner of an auction often turns out to be the loser. Industry analysts have noted that companies that regularly emerge as winning bidders from these oil-field auctions systematically paid too much and years later went under. This is understandable. If the estimates vary between $10 million and $100 million, the actual value most likely lies somewhere in the middle, and the highest bid at the auction is often much too high. Unless these bidders have critical information, others are not privy to. And this was not the case in Texas. The oil managers actually celebrated the Pyrrhic victory. Today, this phenomenon affects us all. From eBay to Groupon to Google AdWords, prices are consistently set by auction. Bidding wars for cell phone frequencies drive telecom companies to the brink of bankruptcy. Airports rent out their commercial spaces to the highest bidder, and if Walmart plans to introduce a new detergent and asks for tender for 5 suppliers, that's for nothing more than an auction, with the risk of the winner's curse. The auctioning of everyday life has no rigid tradesman do, and thanks to the internet, when my walls needed a new lick of paint, instead of tracking down the handiest painter, I advertised the job online, and there are 30 painters, some from more than 300 miles away, compete for the job. The best offer was so low that, out of compassion, I could not accept it. To spare the poor painter the winner's curse. Initial public offerings, IPOs, are also examples of auctions. And when companies buy other companies, the infamous mergers and acquisition, the winner's curse is present more often than not. Astounding, more than half of all acquisitions destroy value, according to a McKinsey study. So, why do we fall victim to the winner's curse? First, the real value of many things is uncertain. Additionally, the more interested parties, the greater the likelihood of an overly enthusiastic bid. Second, we went to outdoor competitors. A friend who owns a micro antenna factory and told me about the cutthroat bidding war that Apple instigated during the development of the iPhone. And everyone wants to be the official supplier to Apple, even though Whoever gets the contract is likely to lose money. So, how much would you pay for $100? Imagine that you and an opponent are invited to take part in such an auction. The rules: whoever makes the highest offer gets the $100 bill, and most importantly, when this happens, both bidders have to pay the final offer. And how high will you go? From your perspective, it makes sense to pay $20, $30, $40. Your opponent does the same. Even 99% seems like a reasonable offer for a $100 bill. And now your competitor offers $100. If this remains the highest bid, he will come away breaking even, whereas you will simply have to coach up $99. So you continue to bid, and at $110, you have a guaranteed loss of $10, but your opponent would have to shell out $109, his last bid, so he will continue playing. When do you stop? When will your competitor give up? Try it out with friends. In conclusion, accept this piece of wisdom about auctions from Warren Buffett. Don't go. If you happen to work in an industry where they are inevitable, set a maximum price and deduct 20% from this to offset the winner's curse. Write this number on a piece of paper and don't go a cent over it. Chapter 36. Never ask a writer if the novel is autobiographical. Fundamental attribution error. Opening the newspaper, you learn that another CEO has been forced to step down because of bad result. In the sports section, you read that your team winning season was thanks to the player X or Coach X, Coach Y. In history books, you learn that the success of the French army in the early 18th is a testament to Napoleon's superb leadership and strategy, and every story has a face. It seems indeed this is an ironclad rule in every newsroom, always on the lookout for the people angle. Journalists and their readers take this principle one step further, and thus fall prey to the fundamental attribution error. This describes the tendency to overestimate individual influence and underestimate external, situational factor. In 1967, researchers at Duke University set up the following experiment. Participants read an argument either lauding or vilifying Fidel Castro. They were informed that the author of the text had been allocated the viewpoint, regardless of his true political views. He was just making a coherent argument. Nevertheless, most of the audience believed what he said reflected his true opinion. They falsely attributed the content of the speech to his character and ignored the external factor, in this case the professor who had crafted the text. The fundamental attribution error is particularly useful for a whittling negative event into neat little package. For example, the blame of wars relatedly pushed on to individuals. The Yugoslav assassin in Sarajevo has World War I on his conscience, and Hitler single-handedly caused the World War II, and many swallow this simplification, even though wars are unforeseeable events whose innumerable dynamics we may never fully understand, which sounds a little like financial markets and climate issues. Don't you agree? We see in this game the same pattern when companies announce good or bad results. All eyes shift to the CEO's office, even if we know the truth. Economic success depends far more on the overall economic climate and industry attractiveness than on brilliant leadership. It is interesting how frequently firms in ailing industries replace their CEOs and how seldom that happens in booming sectors. Are ailing industries less careful in their recruitment processes? Such a decision are no more rational than what happens between football coaches and their clubs. I often go to musical concerts in my hometown of Lugano. In the center of Switzerland, I'm appalled with one of classical recitals. During the intermission, however, I noticed that the conversation almost always revolved around the conductors and or soloists. With the exception of the world premieres, composition is rarely discussed. Why? The real miracle of music is, After all, the composition, the creation of sound, moods, and rhythm were previously only a blank of shade, and the difference among score is 1,000 times more impressive than the difference among performance of the same score. But we do not think like this. The score is, in contrast to the conductors and soloists, faceless. In my career as a fiction writer, I experienced the fundamental attribution error in these days. After reading, the first question always is, what part of your novel is autobiographical? I often feel like a thundering. It's not about me, damn it. It's about the book, the text, the language, the credibility of the story. But unfortunately, my upbringing allows such outbursts only rarely. We shouldn't judge those guilty of the fundamental attribution error too harshly. Our preoccupation with other people stems from our evolutionary past. Belonging to a group was necessary for survival, reproduction, defense, and hunting large animals, and all these were impossible tasks for individuals to achieve alone. Banishment means sudden death, and those who actively opted for the solitary life, of whom there were surely a few, and fared no better, and also disappeared from the gene pool. In short, our lives depended on and revolve around others, which explain why we are so obsessed with our fellow humans today. The result of this infatuation is that we spend about 90% of our time thinking about other people and dedicated just 10% to assessing the factor and context. In conclusion, as much as we are fascinated by the spectacle of life, the people on stage are not perfect, self-governed individuals. Instead, they tumble from situation to situation. If you want to understand the current day, really understand it, then forget about the performers. Pay close attention to the dance of influences to which the actors are subjected. Chapter 37. Why you shouldn't believe in the dark. False causality. For the inhabitants of the Hebrides, a chain of islands north of Scotland, headlights were a part of life. If the lights left their house, he became sick and feverish. Therefore, to dispel the fever, sick people had lice put in their hair intentionally, and there was a method to their madness. As soon as the lice had settled in again, the patient improved. In one city, a study revealed that each blaze, the more firefighters called out to fight it, the greater the fire damage. The mayor imposed an immediate hiring freeze and cut the firefighting budget. Both stories come from German physics Professor Hans-Peter Beck, Bornhold, and Hans Hermann Doben. In their book, they illustrate the modeling of cause and effect. If the lights leave the invalid, it is because he has a fever, and they simply got hot feet. And when the fever breaks, they return. And the bigger the place, the more firefighters were called out, not, of course, vice versa. We must make at the stories, but false causality leads us astray practically every day. Consider the headline, employee motivation leads to high corporate profit. Does it? Maybe people are simply more motivated because the company is doing well. Another headline touts that the more women on a corporate board, the more profitable the firm is. But is that really how it works? Are two highly profitable firms simply tend to recruit more women to their boards, and business book authors and consultants often operate with similar false or at least fuzzy causalities. In the 90s, there was no one holier than the then head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. His obscure remarks have monetary policy the aura of the secret science that kept this country on the secure path of prosperity. Politicians, journalists, and business leaders idolized Greenspan, and today we know that this commentator fell victim to false causality. America's symbiosis with China, the globe's low-cost producer and eager buyer of U.S. debt, play a much more important role. In other words, Greenspan was simply lucky that the economy did so well during his tenure. A further example, scientists found that the long period in the hospital affected patients adversely, and despite music to health insurers' ears, they, of course, are keen to make stays as brief as possible. But clearly patients who are discharged immediately are healthier than those who must stay on for treatment, and this hardly makes long stays detrimental. Or take this headline, fact, women who use shampoo XYZ every day have stronger hair, and doubt the context that can be substantiated scientifically. The statements say very little. Least of all, that the shampoo makes your hair stronger. It might simply be the other way around, and women with a strong hair tend to use shampoo XYZ, and perhaps that's because it says special for thick hair on the bottle. Recently I read that students get better grades at school if their homes contain a lot of books, and the study was really shot in the arm of for bookseller, but it is another fine example of false causality. The simple truth is that educated parents tend to value their children's education more than uneducated ones do. Plus, educated parents often have more books at home. In short, a dust-covered copy of War and Peace alone is not going to influence another's grade. And what counts is parents' education level as well as their genes. The best example of false causality was the supposed relationship between the birth rate and the numbers of stork pairs in Germany. Both were in decline, and if you plot them on a graph of two lines of development from 1965 to 1987 appear almost identical. Does this mean the stork actually does bring babies? Obviously not, since this was a purely coincidental correlation. In conclusion, correlation is not causality. Take a closer look at link event. Sometimes what is presented as the cause turns out to be the effect, and vice versa, and sometimes there is no link at all, just like with the storks and babies. Chapter 38, Everyone is Beautiful at the Top. Hello, Effect. Cisco, the Silicon Valley team, was once a darling of the new economy. Business journalists gushed about its success in every discipline. It's wonderful. Customer service, perfect strategy, skillful acquisition, and unique corporate culture and charismatic CEO. In March 2000, it was the most valuable company in the world. When Cisco stock plummeted 80% of the following year, the journalists changed their tune. Suddenly, the company's competitive advantages were reframed as a destructive shortcoming: poor customer service, a woolly strategy, clumsy acquisition, a lame corporate culture, and an insipid CEO. All this, and yet neither the strategy nor the CEO had changed. And what had changed? In the wake of the dot-com crash was demand for Cisco product, and that was through no fault of the firm. The halo effect occurs when a single aspect dazzles us and affects how we see the full picture. In the case of Cisco, its halo shone particularly bright, and journalists were astounded by its stock prices and assumed the entire business was just as brilliant without making closer investigation. The halo effect always worked the same way. We take a sample to obtain a remarkable fact or detail, such as the company financial situation, and extrapolate conclusions from there that are harder to nail down, such as the merit of its management or the feasibility of its strategy. We often ascribe success and superiority where little is due, such as when we favor product from a manufacturer simply because of its good reputation. Another good example of the halo effect, we believe that CEOs who are successful in one industry will thrive in any sector, and furthermore, that they are heroes in their private lives too. The psychologist Edward Lee Thorndike discovered the halo effect nearly 100 years ago. His conclusion was that single quality, beauty, social status, and age produce a positive or negative impression that outshines everything else, and the overall effect is disproportionate. Beauty is the best studied example. Dozens of studies have shown that we automatically regard good-looking people as more pleasant, honest, and intelligent. Attractive people also have it easier in their professional life, and that has nothing to do with the myth of women sleeping their way to the top. The effect can even be detected in school, where teachers unconsciously give good-looking students get better grades. And advertising has found an ally in the halo effect. Just look at the number of celebrities smiling at us from TV ads, billboards, and magazines. What makes a professional tennis player like Roger Federer a coffee machine expert is still open for debate, but this is not detracted from the success of the campaign. We are so used to seeing celebrities promoting arbitrary products that we never stop to consider why their support should be very important to us. But this is exactly the sneaky part of the halo effect. It works on a subconscious level, and all that needs to register is the attractive face, dream lifestyle, and that product. Sticking with the negative effect, the halo effect can lead to great injustice and even stereotyping when nationality, gender, or race becomes the all-encompassing feature. One need to be neither racist nor sexist to fall victim to this. The halo effect clothes our view, just as it does the view of journalists, educators, and consumers. Occasionally, this effect has pleasant consequences, at least in the short term. Have you ever been head over heels in love? If so, you know how flawless a person can appear. Your mere Mr. Or Miss Perfect seems to be the whole package, attractive, intelligent, likable, and warm. Even when your friends might point out obvious failing, you see nothing but endearing queer. The halo effect obstructs our view of true characteristic. To counteract this, go beyond face value, factor out the most striking feature, and world-class orchestra. Achieve this by making candidates play behind a screen, so that sex, race, age, and appearance play no part in their decision. And to business journalists, I warmly recommend judging a company by something other than its easily obtainable quarterly figures. Dig deeper. Invest the time to do serious research. What emerges is not always pretty, but almost always educational. Chapter 39. Congratulations, you have won Russian roulette alternative paths. You arrange to meet with a Russian oligarch in a forest just outside your city. He arrives shortly after you and carrying a suitcase and a gun. Placing the suitcase on the hood of his car, he opens it so you can see it is filled with the brim with stock and money, like a $10 million in total. Want to play Russian roulette? He asks. Pull the trigger once and all this is yours. The revolver contains a single bullet, and the other 5 chambers are empty. You consider your options? $10 million would change your life. You would never have to work again. You could finally move from collecting stamps to collecting sports cars, and you accept the challenge. You put the revolver to your temple and squeeze the trigger. You hear a faint click and feel adrenaline flood your body, and nothing happens. The chamber was empty, and you have survived. You take the money, must have the most beautiful city you know, and upset the local by building a luxurious villa there. And one of these neighbors, whose home now stands in the shadow of yours, is the prominent lawyer. He works 12 hours a day, 300 days a year, and his rates are impressive but not unusual. $500 per hour each year. He can put aside $500,000 net after taxes and living expenses. From time to time, you wave to him from your drive away, laughing on the side. He will have to work for 20 years to catch up with you. Suppose that after 20 years, your hardworking neighbor has saved up $10 million. A journalist comes along one day and put together a piece on the more affluent resident in the area, complete with photos of the magnificent building and the beautiful second wife that you and your neighbor have accrued. He comments on the interior design and the exquisite landscaping. However, crucial difference between the two of you remains hidden from view. The risk that lurks behind each of the $10 million for this he would need to recognize the alternative paths. Alternative paths are all the outcomes that could have happened but did not. With a game of Russian roulette, for alternative path would have led to the same result, winning the $10 million and the fifth alternative to your death. A huge difference. In the case of the lawyer, the possible paths lie much more close together. In a village, he would have earned perhaps just $200 per hour in the heart of New York working for one of the major investment banks. Maybe it would have been $600 per hour, but unlike you, he risked no alternative path that would have cost him his fortune or his life. Alternative paths are invisible, so we contemplate them very rarely, and those who speculate on junk bonds, option and credit default swap, those making millions, should never forget that. They flirt with many alternative paths that lead straight to ruin, and to a rational mind, $10 million that comes out through a huge risk is worth less than the same sum earned by years of drudgery. And recently I was at a dinner with an American friend who suggested tossing a coin to decide who should pay the bill. He lost. The situation was uncomfortable for me, since he was my guest in Switzerland. Next time I will pay, whether here or in New York, I promise. He thought for a moment and said, considering the alternative path, you have actually already paid for half of this dinner. In conclusion, risk is not directly visible, therefore always consider what the alternative paths are, and success that comes about through risky dealings is, to a rational mind, of less worth than success achieved the boring way. For example, with laborious work as a lawyer, dentist, a ski instructor, a pilot, a hairdresser, or a consultant. Yes, looking at alternative paths from the outside is a difficult task. Looking at them from the inside is an almost impossible task. Your brain will do everything to convince you that your success is warranted, no matter how risky your dealings are, and will obscure any thought of paths other than the one you are on. Chapter 14. False Prophets, Forecast Illusion. Facebook to be number one entertainment platform in 3 years, regime shift in North Korea in 2 years, soap grapes for French as Argentinian wines expected to dominate Euro collapse likely, low-cost space flights by 2025, no more crude oil in 15 years. Every day, experts bombard us with a prediction, but how reliable are they? Until a few years ago, no one bothered to check. Then along came Philip Tatlock. Over a period of 10 years, he evaluated 28,361 predictions from 284 self-appointed professionals. The result, in terms of accuracy, the expert fared only marginally better than a random forecast generator. Ironically, the media darling were among the poorest performers, and of those the worst were prophets of doom and disintegration. Examples of their far-fetched forecasts included the collapse of Canada, Nigeria, China, India, Indonesia, South Africa, Belgium, and the U. And none of these countries has imploded. There are two kinds of forecasters, those who don't know and those who don't know they don't know, and wrote Harvard economist John Kenneth Galbraith. With this, he made himself a figure of hatred in his own guild. Fund manager Peter Lynch summed it up even more cuttingly. There are 60,000 economists in the US, many of them employ full-time trying to forecast recession and interest rate. And if they could do it successfully twice in a row, they would all be millionaires by now. As far as I know, most of them are still gainfully employed, and which ought to tell us something. That was 10 years ago. Today, the US could employ 3 times as many economists with little or no effect on the quality of their forecasts. The problem is that experts enjoy free rein with the few negative consequences. If they strike it lucky, they enjoy publicity, consultancy offers, and publication deals. If they are completely off the mark, they face no penalties, either in terms of financial compensation or in loss of reputation. This win-win scenario virtually incentive them to churn out as many prophecies they can muster. Indeed, the more forecasts they generate, the more will be coincidentally correct. Ideally, they should have to pay into some sort of forecast fund, say $1,000 per year, For prediction, if the forecast is correct, the expert gets his money back with interest. If he is wrong, the money goes to charity. So what is predictable and what is not? Some things are fairly simple. For example, I have a rough idea on how many pounds I will weigh in a year's time. However, the more complex a system, the longer the time frame and the more blurred the view of the future will be. The global warming, oil prices or exchange rate are almost impossible to foresee. Inventions are not all at all predictable because if we knew what technology we would invent in the future, we would already have invented it. So, be critical when you encounter prediction. Whenever I hear one, I make sure to smile, no matter how bleak it is. And I ask myself two questions. First, what incentive does the expert have? If he is an employee, could he lose his job if he is always wrong? Or is he a self-appointed guru who earns a living through books and lectures? The latter type of forecaster relies on the media's attention so predictably his promises tend to be sensational. And second, how good is the success rate? How many predictions has he made over the past 5 years? Out of this, how many have been right and how many have not? And this information is vital, yet often goes unreported. I implore the media, please don't publish any more forecasts without giving the pundits a track record. Finally, since it is self-fitting, a quote from former British Prime Minister Tony Blair: I don't make predictions, I never have, and I never will. Chapter 41: The Deception of Specific Cases. Conjunction Fallacy. Chris is 35. He studies social philosophy and has had an interest in developing countries since he was a teenager. After graduation, he worked for 2 years with the Red Cross in West Africa and then for 3 years in its Geneva headquarters, where he rose to head to the African Aid Department. He then completed an MBA, writing his thesis on corporate social responsibility. What is more likely? A. Chris worked for a major bank, or B. Chris worked for a major bank where he runs its Third World Foundation. A or B? Most people will opt for B. Unfortunately, it's the wrong answer. Option B does not only say that Chris worked for a major bank, but also that an additional condition has been met. Employer who works specifically within a bank's Third World Foundation comprise a tiny subset of bankers, and therefore option A is much more likely. The conjunction fallacy is at play when such a subset seems larger than the entire set, which by definition cannot be the case. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky have studied this extensively. We are easy prey for the conjunction fallacy because we have an innate attraction to harmonious or plausible stories. The more convincingly, impressively, or vividly crisp the aid worker is portrayed, the greater the risk of false reasoning. If I had put it a different way, you would have recognized the extra detail as overly specific. For example, Chris is 35. What is more likely? A. Chris works for a bank, or B. Chris works for a bank in New York where his office is on the 24th floor overlooking Central Park. Here is another example. What is more likely? A. Seattle Airport is closed, flights are cancelled. And or B. Seattle Airport is closed due to bad weather, flights are cancelled. A or B? This time you have it. A is more likely since B implies that an additional condition has been met, namely bad weather. It could be that a bomb threat, accident, or strike close to the airport. However, when faced with a possible story, we don't stop to consider such a thing. And now that you are aware of this, and try it out with your friends, and you will see that most of pick B. Even experts are not immune to the conjunction fallacy. In 1982, at an international conference for future research experts, all of them academic, were divided into two groups. To Group A, Daniel Kahneman presented the following forecast for 1983. Oil consumption will decrease by 30%. Group B heard that a dramatic rise in oil price will lead to 30% reduction in oil consumption, and both groups had to indicate how likely they considered the scenario, and the result was clear. Group B felt much more strongly about its forecast than the Group A did, and Kahneman believe that two types of thinking exist, and the first kind is intuitive, automatic, and direct, and the second is conscious, rational, slow, laborious, and logical. Unfortunately, intuitive thinking draws conclusions long before the conscious mind does. For example, I experienced this after the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, and I wanted to take our travel insurance and came across a firm that offers special terrorism cover. Although other policies protected against all possible incidents, including terrorism, I automatically fell for the offer, and the high point of the whole force was that I was willing to pay even more for this enticing yet redundant add-on. In conclusion, forget about left brains and right brains. The difference between intuitive and conscious thinking is much more significant. With important decisions, remember that at the intuitive level, we have a soft spot for plausible stories and therefore be on the lookout for a convenient detail and happy endings. And remember, if an additional condition has to be met, no matter how plausible it sounds, it will become less, not more. Chapter 42 is not what you say, but how you say it. Framing. Consider these two statements. Hey, the trash can is full. Or B, it would be really great if you could empty the trash, honey. C'est le temps qui fait la muscu. It's not what you say, but how you say it. If a message is communicated in different ways, it will also be received in different ways. In psychologist jargon, this technique is called framing. We react differently to identical situations depending on how they are represented, and Kahneman and Tversky conducted a survey in 1980s in which they put forward two options for an epidemic control strategy. The lives of 600 people were at stake, and they told participants option A save 200 lives. Option B offered a 33% chance that all 600 people will survive, and a 66% chance that no one will survive. Although option A and B were comparable, the majority of respondents chose A, remembering the adage, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It became really interesting when the same option were reframed. Option A kills 400 people, option B offered a 33% chance that no one will die, and a 66% chance that all 600 will die. This time only a fraction of the respondents chose A and the majority picked B. The researchers observed a complete U-turn from almost all involved. Depending on the preferring survive or die, the respondent made completely different decisions. Another example, researchers presented a group of people with the two kinds of meat, 99% fat-free and 1% fat, and asked them to choose which was healthier. Can you guess which they picked? Bingo, respondent ranked the first type of meat as healthier, even though both were identical. Next came the choice between 98% fat-free and 1% fat again. Most respondents chose the first option despite its higher fat content. Closing is a popular type of framing. Under its rule, a tumbling share price becomes correction. An overpaid acquisition price is branded goodwill. In every management course, a problem magically transforms into an opportunity or a challenge. A person who is fired is reassessing his career. A fallen soldier, regardless of how much bad luck or stupidity led to his death, turns into a war hero. Genocide translates to ethnic cleansing. A successful emergency landing, for example, on the Hudson River, is celebrated as a triumph of aviation. Have you ever looked more closely at the prospectus for a financial product, for example, ETF, exchange-traded funds? Generally, the brochure illustrates the product performance in recent years, and going back just far enough for the nicest possible upward curve to emerge. This is also framing. Another example is a simple place to bread, depending on how it is framed, as either the symbolic or the true body of Christ. It can split a religion, as happened in the 16th century with the Reformation. Framing is used to good effect in commerce too. Consider used car. You are led to focus on just a few factors, whether the message is delivered through a salesman assigned to think a certain feature, or even your own criteria. For example, if the car has low mileage and good tires, your home in on and overlook the state of the engine and the brakes or the interior. This the mileage and tires becomes the main selling point and the frame of our decision to buy. Such oversight is only natural, though. Since it is difficult to take in all possible pros and cons, interestingly, had other frames have been used to tout the car, we might have decided very differently. Authors are conscious framers too. A crime novel would be rather dull off. From page one, the murder was shown as it happened, step by step, as it were. Even though we eventually discover the motive and murder weapon, the novelists framing inject thrills and suspense into the story. In conclusion, realize that whatever you communicate contains some element of framing, and that every fact, even if you hear it from a trusted friend or read it in a reputable newspaper, is subject to this effect too, even this chapter. Chapter 43: Why Watching and Waiting is Torture. Action Bias. In a penalty situation in soccer, the ball takes less than 0.3 seconds to travel from the player who kicks the ball to the goal. There is not enough time for the goalkeeper to watch the ball's trajectory. He must take a decision before the ball is kicked, and soccer players who take penalty kicks shot one-third of the time at the middle of the goal, one-third of the time at the left, and one-third of the time at the right. Surely goalkeepers have spotted this, but what do? They dive either to the left or to the right, and rarely do they stay standing in the middle, even though roughly a third of the balls land there. Why on earth would they jeopardize saving these penalties? And the simple answer: appearance. It looks more impressive and feels less embarrassing to dive to the wrong side than to freeze on the spot and watch the ball sail past. This is the action bias. Look active even if it achieves nothing. The study comes from the Israeli researcher Mikhail Bar-Eli, who evaluated hundreds of penalty shotouts. But not just goalkeepers fall victim to the action bias. Suppose a group of youth exists in a nightclub and begin to argue, shouting at each other and gesturing wildly. The situation is closing to escalating into an all-out brawl. The police officer in the area, some young, some more senior, hold back, monitor the scene from the distance and intervene only when the first casualties appear. If no experienced officers are involved, the situation often ends differently. Young, overzealous officers succumb to the action bias and dive in immediately. A study has revealed that the later intervention, thanks to the calming presence of senior officers, result in fewer casualties. The action bias is accentuated when the situation is new or unclear. When starting out, many investors act like a young, gung-ho police officer outside the nightclub, and they cannot yet judge the stock market, so they compensate with a sort of hyperactivity. Of course, this is a waste of time. As Charlie Munger sums up his approach to investing: we have got discipline in avoiding just going any damn thing just because you can't stand inactivity. The action bias exists even in the most educated circles. If a patient illness cannot yet be diagnosed with a certainty, a doctor must choose between intervening or waiting and seeing. They are prone to taking action. Such decisions have nothing to do with profiteering, but rather with the human tendency to want to do anything but sit and wait in the face of uncertainty. So what accounts for this tendency? In our old hunter-gatherer environment, action trumped reflection. Lightning of fast reaction were essential to survival. Deliberation could be fatal. When our ancestors saw a silhouette appear at the edge of the forest, something that looked a lot like a saber-toothed tiger, they did not take a brew to muse over what it might be. They hit the road and fast. We are the descendant of these quick responders. Back then, it was better to run away once too often, and however our role today is different. It rewards reflection, even though our instinct may suggest otherwise. Although we now value contemplation more highly, outright inaction remains a cardinal sin. You get no honor, no medal, no statue with your name on it if you make exactly the right decision by waiting for the good of the company, the state, even humanity. On the other hand, if you demonstrate decisiveness and quick judgment and the situation improves, it's quite possible your boss or even the major will shake your hand. Society at large prefers rush action to the sensible and wait-and-see strategy. In conclusion, in new or sticky circumstances, we feel compelled to do something, anything, and afterward we feel better, even if we have made things worse by acting too quickly or too often. So, Dove, it might not merit a parrot in your honor if a situation is unclear. Hold back until you can assess your option. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone, wrote Blaise Pascal. At home, in his